Daniel is our vice president.
For now. I was gonna switch to secretary,
Well,
but I am for now.
for now. He's on the board, and he was also involved in CFI, and he lives in Vernon, and he is an ex-Catholic. But I think you can never leave, that's what.
Well, yeah.
So please welcome Daniel.
Imagine for a moment, imagine for a moment that a big, admired, multinational corporation, one selling a beloved product, was employing a large number of male pedophiles and rapists, operating in rings all over the world, and that their crimes have been uncovered in Australia, Ireland, Canada, the Philippines, Belgium, France, Australia, New Zealand, Argentina, Ireland, Canada, Britain, Chile, Germany, and of course the United States. And further, that senior executives had systematically covered up and suppressed evidence, transferring and enabling hundreds of predators, betraying thousands of victims. What would happen if this were a company is not terribly difficult to imagine. But of course, no company's warranty guarantees everlasting life, and no company maintains that its CEO is chosen by God. This was a quote that I really liked from an article by Neil MacDonald on the CBC. And he talks about this comparison that I've also often thought about, is any institution, a secular institution, that did what the Catholic Church has done would no longer exist. It would be sued into oblivion. And as I make my point today, I will intersperse a little bit of the story of my own journey through and out of Catholicism. But the two main points that I really have to offer you are, number one, that the Catholic Church is a criminal organization that should be sued, prosecuted, and arrested into oblivion. And number two, that those who still consider themselves Catholic and support the institution financially are complicit in the organized, systematic cover-up of the rape of children. For some of you, maybe you might disagree. For me, this is pretty much just fact. And the latest scandals that kind of prompted us to think about talking about this were what happened in Pennsylvania back in August, where more than 1,000 incidents of sexual abuse over decades by more than 300 priests were revealed in a grand jury report. What's interesting, though, is why, when these kind of crimes are revealed, why doesn't the church get sued into oblivion? Why aren't they forced to expose their records? Why aren't they forced to stand by the same principles that a secular institution would? In his article that I have up here, he figures that a big part of the reason is that there isn't the political will when you have, typically in Canada or the US, 25%, 40%, 50% of our population is still dominantly Catholic. And that the amount of political and will to be able to sue the church and to be able to pursue this would take more than what any organization is willing to actually do, or what a secular organization is willing to do. He writes that the scale of prosecution to inflict severe damage would require steadfast political will, and who wants to alienate 24% of their population? That the same goes elsewhere, including in Canada and in British Columbia, where we've had our own history of abuse by Catholics of children. Look no further than what happened in the residential schools. There have been some lawsuits and there have been some dismissals, but nothing of the scale that we would imagine were a company like Apple Computers, for example. So my family, here we go, nice little picture. So this is my daughter's baptism in 2005. And That's my lovely wife who's there in the picture. And this is, I love this name for a priest. This is Father Christian. So my family, it's hard to describe what it means. I use the term sometimes Orthodox Catholics or true Catholics. We try to follow everything that the church believes and teaches. So, one of the top of that list is no birth control. I have a cousin who famously has 8 kids. One of my close Catholic friends is, I think, on number 9. Is that right? Or 10? It's hard to count. My family was weekly mass, all holy days of obligations. I remember, like when I was a kid, I'd go on a ski trip, a school ski trip with friends. And I went to a Catholic high school, and we go on the ski trip to Banff or whatever. I was the only one that goes to mass on the weekend. And my entire high school of Catholics, nobody goes except me. Like that's how kind of fervent I was and crazy about it. Rosaries, prayer life. Around the age of 16 or so, there's kind of this element of Protestantism and Catholicism that emerged, and around the age of 16 there was this sort of experience of having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ and accepting Him as your Lord and Savior, and I kind of had that experience and became even more devout and started going to daily Mass, like every day going to Mass. Daily readings, daily meditations, rosaries, chaplets, adorations, Eucharistic adoration. I don't know if you know what that is. It's like where they take out the communion bread and then they put it in this big fancy receptacle, and then everybody kneels and worships and sings and chants or prays and reads while they're sort of in the presence of Jesus through the bread. Praise and worship, church choir, and of course, as a young Catholic male, thinking that I was called to become a priest. So the one thing for me is that I was never abused or raped or touched or molested in any way by any Catholic clergy. For the most part, all the interactions I had with clergy, there were some that definitely were a little on the creepy side, and I'll get to that, but there was nothing that crossed any boundaries that, whatsoever. And so when I talk on this topic, it upsets me very much because I feel very much that I was abused by the Catholic Church, but not sexual abuse. To me, the abuse is really psychological, where as a Catholic, you're in this never-ending cycle of sin and confession. So you basically are told that you're a sinner, you're a failure, God looks down on you and judges your sins. But good news, go to confession, and your sins are wiped clean, right? But then inevitably, you sin again. And so you're just in this never-ending loop that's impossible to escape. And you just get the message that you're a sinner and you're never good enough. And that also the discouragement, part of that psychological abuse to me is the discouragement to think for yourself on questions of morality, especially, but also questions of truth. And of course, there's that famous Catholic guilt, right, which is so tied to that economy of salvation, that sin, confession, where everything you do, and of course, that starts to drill down into any area of human sexuality, just becomes sinful. And so I really felt that this psychological abuse was horrible enough, and then to think of these children who on top of that also receive sexual, physical abuse, it's gut-wrenching, and it's horrific. And the hypocrisy of this institution that, covers up for people to do this, and yet turns around and claims to be a moral authority when it comes to abortion rights, let's say, or euthanasia or anything, and they say, oh no, we have the absolute moral and infallible truth, yet we do such horrific things to children. And I think that's a lot of where this gets me so wound up, but also the fact that to this day, we have all kinds of Catholics, many of them in my family, that give large sums of money to this church out of their own volition and continue to support it. And again, you go back to that analogy of, if I were buying an iPhone and I knew this was supported by pedophiles, I would not be buying iPhones. And yet we have these Catholics that continue to support the church despite the horrific things they do. The talk, when I was sort of looking this up and researching on this, there's so much you could talk about. But I thought I'd kind of focus on two myths, kind of in that sort of skeptical thought theme, to think skeptically. Like, here are two common myths that I hear all the time about the abuse in the church and why they're not true. So the first myth that we hear all the time, or I do, is that the problem is recent. So this problem of priests raping and abusing children, well, it started, in the 60s with the love generation and the hippies and the free love, and the priests got word of that, and so you can blame it on modernity, right? Or, it just was in the last 50 years or the last century. Like, this isn't something that has been here for very long. Whereas the truth is that the history of clerical child sexual abuse is as old as the church itself. And the reason we can know that is that in the first century, the handbook for Christians, called the Didacta, D-I-D-A-C-H-E, actually forbids adult men from having sex with boys. This is the first century. And if they had to write it in there, there was a reason. You go to 306 CE, where they basically, in a council, passed the Council of Elvira, where they said child rapists could not receive communion. And then we get this great guy here. I'll read out the quote in case you can't quite see it, but this is Basil of Caesarea. I don't like using the term saints for these guys, but they call him Saint Basil the Great. And I don't have the date on this quote, but he lived from about 329 to 379. And basically he wrote that any cleric or monk who seduces young men or boys, who is apprehended in kissing or in any shameful situation, shall be publicly flogged and shall lose his clerical tonsure. This shorn, he shall be disgraced by spitting into his face, bound in iron chains, wasted by 6 months of close confinement. I like this, actually, where he's going with this. And for 3 days each week, put on barley bread, given to word him in the evening. Following this period, he shall spend a further 6 months living in small, segregated courtyard in the custody of a spiritual elder, kept busy with manual labor and prayer. This part's really interesting, is that he says at the end, forced to walk at all times in the company of 2 spiritual brothers, and never again allowed to associate with young men for purposes of improper conversation or advice. And I find it really interesting that even back then, they had this idea that at least to keep them away from children, which is more than what can be said for the Catholic Church in the last 50 years or so. After this amazing quote, we have Constantine, of course, who legalizes Christianity, makes it the official religion of the Roman Empire, and provides the privilege of clergy. So what this means is basically that if you're a member of the clergy and you're accused of any crime, you don't have to go to secular courts. You're tried and receive justice through canon law, through the church. Anything that a priest or bishop does wrong is dealt with internally, can be kept quiet. It should also be noted around the 11th century is where celibacy is instituted for Roman order priests, which I think is a factor of this. So this guy, Pope Gregory IX, in the 13th century, is interesting because he talks about demanding expulsion from the priesthood and turning all perpetrators over to secular authorities in the 13th century because of this history that had been going on for probably 1,000 years at this point, that any crimes committed by a priest are dealt with internally and kept quiet. So again, more evidence that this is occurring, and this has been occurring for a very, very long time. In 1741, Pope Benedict, I think that's the 14th, he actually, I don't have his picture here, but he did this crazy thing where he actually posted on all the churches that it was a crime to solicit sex in the confessionals for minors. And he had to have this posted to all the churches and say that if you did this, you could get booted out of the priesthood. So he got this put on all the churches in Rome. And it's kind of, going back to the creepy stuff for me personally is, I don't know how familiar everybody is with confession. You've probably seen it in movies or whatever, where you go into this dusty, dark box, and there's this priest in this box beside you, and then he slides this little window open, and he kind of starts whispering to you about, bless me, Father, for I have sinned, and what have you done, child? And it's such a bizarre, creepy place to be in. I mean, as an adult, let alone as a child. And then, as a child, or even as an adult, it's like, oh, well, geez, I hit my brother, or, I didn't help this old lady across the street or something. Like, it doesn't take very long before the only sins you have to speak of are sins of a sexual nature. And that's pretty much all there is to talk about with this celibate man in this dark little wooden booth. And it gets really creepy where at times, you would talk to him and I'd be in confession, try to keep it general, like, oh, Father, I did something I shouldn't have, whatever. And the priest would be like, well, I need some more details here. Tell me more, son, right? Like, yeah. And those were times where you definitely got a little creeped out. Not every priest was like that, but some of them were, please tell me the dirty details of these sexual sins. And you're like, no, thank you. So let's go up to 1962. We have Vatican II with Pope John the 23rd. And interestingly, he actually brings back the idea of the secretive process. So he requires that all bishops take vows of secrecy when they hear of any crimes committed by a priest, and that the policy itself is to remain secret. So the bishops aren't supposed to tell the priest that this is secret. So everything is just hush, hush, secret, secret. And it's actually interesting because I was reading about lawyers that have used this to defend the bishops in court, saying, well, the Vatican told them this was all secret. They would have no way of knowing about the extent of the problem. We can't possibly sue them when everything was supposed to be secret. How would they know? It's like strange logic. But the point here really is that as long as there's been a church, this has been an issue. So the second myth that I was going to talk about is that the problem is over. So we often hear, well, this was in the past, this was the 60s, the 70s, people made mistakes, this doesn't happen anymore. We moved on as a church, and we're now protecting children, and things are much better nowadays, right? And I have a really hard time believing this. I hope it's gotten better for the sake of the children involved, but you do a little bit of digging, and this whole notion of secrecy is still the official policy of the church. So there's this thing called the pontifical secret. So to protect bishops and priests who commit crimes from being punished by secular authorities, there's this notion in canon law called pontifical secret. And basically it means that if anything is under investigation under canon law, no bishop or priest or clergy can report it to secular authorities. So if it's not a canon law issue, then they can, but it almost always is a canon law issue. So in 2001, so this picture is actually taken in 2002. So this is me and Patty and some other folks, and we're in Toronto. And this is called World Youth Day, where the Pope visited Toronto and visits all these Catholic youth in Toronto. So believe it or not, Pope John Paul II is in this picture. You can't really see him, just to prove it, I have a picture of the screen. There he is up there, talking to us. what's crazy, this is an aside, is that you go to this thing that's like supposed to all be about Catholic, but you can see all the flags, like it's all about nationalism. And everybody coming from around the world waving, I think there's an Alberta flag.
Is there a hockey flag?
Yeah, it's very bizarre, very, very bizarre. And actually, I didn't even think of this until now. Patty and I, this is where we went on our honeymoon, was to see the Pope. That's how crazy Catholic I was, at least. She's like, I don't know what I was thinking. But anyway, so a year before we went to this, Pope John Paul II actually confirmed that pontifical secret applies to any cases of child sexual abuse. In 2010, Pope Benedict here comes out and agrees and says, not only does it apply, pontifical secret apply to child sexual abuse, it also applies to any abuse of disabled adults, and it also applies to any charges of possessing child pornography. So any of those three things are protected by pontifical secret if it's under canon law. If it's not, if canon law hasn't started yet, which would pretty much never happen, then it's not protected. But as soon as anything is being dealt with internally under canon law, pontifical secret applies.
Excuse me, I don't know what canon law is, so this is like you're being charged by the church? And
Yeah.
you have a hearing in the church,
Exactly.
not a secular court, okay.
Yeah. So basically what it's saying is they have jurisdiction. If it's in the Catholic church courts,
Okay,
under canon law, you can't tell secular authorities.
Like soldiers are under military law.
Exactly, yeah, very similar. Yeah. So it's,
So if you're convicted, what's the punishment?
I'll get to that. Well, it talks about it actually that quick there. I was gonna say this picture of Pope Benedict I love because that's my cousin there on the left-hand side.
Oh.
That's my cousin who has 8 kids. And he actually made a CD of like Pope John Paul praying the rosary, and that's what he's giving Pope Benedict there in that picture. So that's like one of my, I had to find a picture of Pope Benedict. I like that one. So Benedict comes out in 2010 and says, yeah, pontifical secrecy, so basically canon law, if something's being tried under canon law, it's secret, you can't go to secular authorities. That includes abusing disabled people with disabilities and child pornography. But bizarrely, in the same year, they announced that they will obey civil laws on reporting, but they again clarified that it has to be before canon law trial has started. Because once canon law trial is started, pontifical secret takes over, and then there's no requirement to report. And there's also no requirement in the church to report any historical abuses. So this would only be a new accusation of abuse that might come up, where they're saying, yes, we will report that to secular authorities, so long as we haven't done canon law yet. In January 2014, the UN comes out and essentially orders the Vatican to abolish pontifical secret and impose mandatory reporting on the Pope. And the current Pope Francis, who's in the next picture here, he goes and says, no, I don't think that's a good idea because that would interfere with the sovereignty of an independent state, because the Vatican considers itself an independent state and it doesn't have to submit to the authority of other states, which is a strange argument. But they're kind of walking both lines. Like they kind of say they are going to report, but then they have all these rules where they don't have to report. And then if I go here, what has happened, and what they did admit, to go back to your question, is they reported that in 2014, I forget the timeline here, I could look it up, but there were 3,400 credible allegations against priests, and only 848 of those priests were actually dismissed. So even within their canon law system, the majority of priests don't get dismissed. And they don't have that rule like our friend in the 3rd century said about, well, let's not keep that guy around children anymore either, right? There's no such rule.
so all that happens is those 848 people got dismissed from the church, but nothing else happened to them.
Nothing else happens. Well, they're defrocked, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but they don't go to jail.
They're going
right?
to jail.
They don't go to jail.
So the church themselves
But they wouldn't, if it was a canon law matter, they never would.
So it says something about it, kind of scene or something.
Yeah. So,
Excuse me, so how do sovereign states with their own civil law, how do they deal with this canon protections here? I mean,
Because
that,
I think
that
they-
would be it's all civil law.
yeah, I think it's because they beat him to it.
But the thing is, if the police found out about it, like if somebody laid charges in civil court, then they, or in a criminal court, they could go ahead. Like,
Yeah.
it's not like the police
Yeah.
force wouldn't do that.
Well, and that's part of why, like, famously, Cardinal Shaw, I think it was, who was sort of the mastermind in what happened in Boston, he had to run the Vatican to hide, right? So that, because he could have been exposed to secular authorities in the U.S. So he was never extricated from the Vatican. He died there.
Bernard Law, wasn't
I think it was Bernard
it?
Shaw.
Bernard Law,
Yeah, I have his name written down here. So it's a mess. I mean, I think there are some people in the church that want to do the right thing. But there's also this whole staff of canon law that is all about protecting the church and protecting those involved. So it's very confusing as to what takes precedent when and where, right?
But it's about time, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about timing, it's about who brings the charges up, it's about what parish you might be in, what bishop you're under. I mean, there's what country you're in, right? It's all very situational.
Daniel, I'm not sure what you're saying, pontifical law? I don't,
Oh, canon law.
no, you said
Oh, pontifical secret.
pontifical.
So pontifical secret, it kind of means that anything that's under canon law is internal, is secret. So if you're being tried under canon law, church law, the church, like other bishops, other priests, can't reveal
Okay.
what's going on inside of that trial. Right? So it'd be kind of like a civil law where the judge is not allowing any outside media, is not allowing any reporting. No one's allowed to talk about it. And if you do, they'll excommunicate you and defrock you and kick you out. It's basically what it means.
So it's dealt with internally,
Yeah,
and it's not dealt with really.
no. It's dealt with internally and it's kept quiet. So it's not just that, well, we can do our civil or our secular trial and canon law. It's like if we do canon law, there is no secular trial. It's basically how it's kind of structured, right?
Here's an important message.
Oh, yeah. I better plug that in. I didn't think it would last long.
But that's only if the authorities don't find out some other way. What we consider to be the authorities.
Yeah.
Right, exactly, right.
But it's very convoluted. It's 2,000 years of history, and it's multiple countries, like every country is going to be different. But I mean, the guy who was most guilty in the U.S. got the hell out of the U.S. So.
So he basically hid in the Vatican.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can move the podium.
Yeah.
Yeah, outside of it. Tripping hazard. So, what I wanted to go back here, yeah, I kind of scrolled up a bit too high, is this part here, right? So, when the report out of Pennsylvania came out just a few months ago, this is the very, very first line of Pope Francis's response. Is even though it can be said that most of these cases belong to the past. Well, every report belongs to the past.
Yeah.
It's not the future.
Yeah. And it's also just playing into this myth, right? Oh, that was back then, we've cleaned up our act, we're not doing this anymore. And, I don't believe them. I really don't. I don't see what evidence there is to say that this is relegated to the past and doesn't continue to occur. I think rates have gone down in countries like Canada and the US, maybe because people are more aware, maybe because parents are more protective of their children, frankly. There could be a lot of reasons. I mean, there is some evidence that the rates have gone down in certain countries, but there's also, when I was researching this, countries like the Philippines, where Catholicism is on the growth, that cases of clerical sexual abuse are increasing as well. So, it just shows you, I mean, yeah, he goes on after this, and there's lots of hand-wringing, and this is horrible, and we committed these horrible sins, and we need to deal with it, and blah, 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 which, you should say, but it just ires me that this is how it starts. There's another quote that I found, actually by one of the victims, talking about how, it's easy to think that when we talk about the crisis of child rape and abuse, we're talking about the past. And the Catholic Church would have us believe that this most tragic era of church history is over. It is not. It lives on today. Pedophiles are still in the priesthood. Cover-ups of their crime are happening now. And bishops, in many cases, are continuing to refuse to turn information over to the criminal justice system. Cases are stalled and cannot go forward because the church has such power to stop them. Children are still being harmed and victims cannot heal. So, again, what's interesting is that, the Pope comes out and he's, all this hand-wringing about how horrible this is. The United Nations is still demanding that they immediately remove all clergy are known of abuse and turn them over to civil authorities, but they don't. They don't. They have all kinds of reasons, especially their pontifical secrecy as to why this is going to happen. It doesn't come anywhere close to opening the records, removing this idea of pontifical secrecy, promising that any and all reports will be immediately turned over to secular authorities. Like, this just isn't happening still. And it's interesting in my mind because, my son's on a hockey team, and, there's been stories of sexual abuse in hockey teams, right? And they have a rule of 2. So you can never have one coach alone with one player. You can never have, you have to always have at least 2 adults if there's going to be one player. The dressing room always has to have 2 adults. And there basically should never be a kid left alone. The kid should always be with one other kid. If you're the last kid to be picked up, and the second last kid has to wait, is the rule of the team. You wait until that last kid is picked up. And these are simple rules that a minor hockey team does that the Catholic Church won't even consider. How about criminal record checks? I want to volunteer on my son's hockey team to pick up pucks. I have to have a criminal record check. Where's that requirement for Catholics, for priests? And then I had my note about Cardinal Bernard Law, who was, not that long ago flown to the Vatican and allowed to hide there, despite outrage from the victims. So that was the bishop who covered up all the crimes in Boston. So that was, if you haven't seen the movie Spotlight, it came out a few years ago, and it's all about Cardinal Law, and excellent movie. So the last little thing I had to talk about was the why. So here's a nice picture of my family and my nephew getting baptized. And I ask this all the time, why is anybody still Catholic? Why would you do this to your kids, right? Why would you put them through this anymore? There's a website called bishopaccountability.org, and they estimate that the Catholic Church has paid over $3 billion in settlements to victims for them to remain quiet. How much money of that comes out of the pockets of these Sunday Catholics that donate money? And we have no idea, obviously, because their books are closed. They don't have to pay taxes. They don't have to file taxes. They don't have to pay property taxes, we like to talk about, right? There are a lot of people that, there are some people that have gone to church over this, but it's nowhere near what I think those numbers should be. And I think I kind of know why. I think I kind of understand why. Because for me, as sort of this average pew potato that I used to be, you're indoctrinated from birth to believe this. I was, the cradle Catholic, learning your religion on your grandma's knee. It's not about something that happens in some parish somewhere in the U.S. And it was easy to believe, as when I was Catholic and was hearing about these abuses, it was easy to believe that that's just a few bad apples, right? That it's just a few people in a small area doing these crimes. And it's interesting because I've actually had a lot of Catholics, when I ask this question, how can you still be Catholic, given what the church is responsible for? And that's their answer. Well, it's just a few bad apples, and really the rates of pedophiles abusing children in the Catholic Church is no different than soccer coaches or school teachers. And I always go, yeah, but they're supposed to be the representative of Jesus, right? They're supposed to be holy orders, like these sacred vows.
So can your friend actually make that claim, since soccer coaches and people are in sacred court, you can count them because they've been in court?
Yeah.
Whereas your books are closed because their books are closed. How do you know that?
Well, that's exactly it. The stats are really hard to come by. There are some numbers, though, that do suggest the rates of child abuse among priests are the same as the rest of society, right? Like, there are some research that does suggest that. But like you said, how would you really know when everything is kept so secret?
I've
But
heard
it seems to me kind of strange for somebody who's Catholic to believe this is God's church, to say, well, priests, only abuse children as bad as random Joe off the street. Like, how does that?
And that makes it.
Yeah, but that's what the excuse I've heard. So personally, I didn't leave the church until around 2007. So as I showed you the picture earlier, we had our daughter baptized Catholic. And this was after a lot of these stories had come out. I just didn't want to believe it, buried my head in the sand. I thought it was just the secular world trying to attack the church. I mean, really anything you could do to discount it and make it go away. And really the only thing that sort of convinced me really to leave the church is reason and science and evidence. It was never about these stories of abuse. It was more about, I was such a fervent Catholic and I wanted to prove it that it was all true so that I could have all this evidence to convince everybody else. And the more that I studied and researched it, I thought it would only be fair to read some of the other side as well. And actually my brother-in-law, he was the one that argues about the soccer coaches are as bad as priests. Well, actually says teachers, right? Teachers are as bad as priests. He had a copy of the God Delusion that a friend had given him. And he said, oh, that's such garbage. Here, if you could take it if you want it. So it was kind of funny that the God Delusion was given to me by a Catholic. But yeah, I mean, just reading the other side, especially, I might have mentioned before to some of you guys, Robert M. Price is one of my favorite sort of writers in terms of studying, critical study of the Bible and early Christianity. And just realizing that the claims of Catholicism just don't hold up to science and history and biblical criticism. It was interesting, actually. For a while there, back in 2006, 2007, when I was really questioning and struggling and deciding on my faith, I, for a while, would go to church, but I would be like, well, I'm not going to say that prayer, or I'm not going to sing that song, or not, but I'll sing that song, or I'll do this part. Kind of trying to find a way to hybridize it all, to make it, get rid of that cognitive dissonance, up to a point where I just couldn't stand going anymore. because I just couldn't agree with any of it. So, it's been 10 plus years of, a little over 11 years of not being Catholic. And it feels like a very long time ago in some ways, but it's also very much present because I have so much of my family, immediate family is Catholic. And more than anything, I think what I struggle with still, probably less and less, is just the shame and regret of being such a jerk in terms of proselytizing and trying to place this on other people when I was a Catholic. Like, I've had a few people that I've apologized to. But also just that sense of like regret of wasting your time on this too. They just, it's tough. The last kind of why question I had here, see if I got this, why the abuse and why the cover-up? I think it's, the debate on the causes is very complex. You can read a lot on why is this so systemic in the Catholic Church? Is it systemic in the Catholic Church even, right? Is it worse than in any other church or in any other walk of life? Maybe not, right? I think it's easy to understand why they want to cover it up. I mean, if you look at these guys, Vatican City is a pretty wealthy little place. These guys have a pretty good life and a lot of power, and they have a lot that they want to protect. I think that's kind of obvious why the cover-up. I mean, that's a natural inclination to, especially when this institution has claims of infallibility and claims of holiness, that they would want to cover this up. The cause of why this has been such a problem in the church, it's like I said, very complex. What I'm pretty much convinced of is that it's not due to homosexuality, and a lot of bishops and priests have said that that's why, because our secular society accepts homosexuality, therefore these priests want to rape boys.
Classic statement.
Yeah, so there's actually been statements, like one by Archbishop Silvano Maria Tomasi in 2009, and he was actually representing the Holy See, and he said that the majority of Catholic clergy who had committed acts of sexual abuse against under 18-year-olds should not be viewed as pedophiles, but as homosexuals. So what they're trying to do is to shift the blame, right? To say it's not about pedophilia, it's about being homosexual. And a tiny bit of research into this shows that most scientists and psychologists agree that there's no connection between being a gay man and being a pedophile. In fact, there might even be an opposite connection where it's less likely to occur. And interestingly, as there's been some rules in the Catholic Church and some dioceses where they've loosened up restrictions against gay priests, where they'll let them in if they vow to not be a practicing gay. And in those areas and dioceses where that's happened, the rates of abuse have actually gone down. So it's hard to say, but I'm pretty sure their excuse of homosexuality is not true. And another thing is that if you actually interview or talk to most of the pedophiles committing these acts, they identify as heterosexual. And a lot of their abuse of boys in particular is more situational, but that's what's available to them. I think some of the reasons why it probably happens that I wrote down, I mean, there's all kinds of them, but one is that there's definitely a shortage of priests. Less and less men are going into the priesthood. So, beggars can't be choosers. They may be picking people that really aren't well suited. There is some evidence to suggest that there's a higher percentage of pedophilia in Catholic priests than in the general public. So if you sampled 100 men off the street versus 100 priests, that the priests are more likely to be pedophiles. again, that kind of stuff is really hard to know for sure. But, you know, some people say it could be the opposite, that the lifestyle, the culture of the priesthood drives them into this direction, which is kind of more what I think. You know, another huge problem in the church is that it's completely male-centric. The entire leadership structure is men. Women have a very small role in the hierarchy of the church, if any. And many have argued that if they would allow women priests, women bishops, had a greater presence of women in the church, that would probably go a long ways to decrease the rates of abuse. There's, what I really think is a huge part of it is the life of celibacy, the seminary training. I think that, and I can attest to this for myself, when I was considering becoming a priest, I was a young man. I was very stunted in any kind of psychosexual growth, because my whole message about sexuality was that it's a sin. And anything around sex is just sinful. So, you know, one quote I found was that the psychosexual maturations were put on hold, so to speak, when the priests go into seminary. So as a result, they tend to act out with young people who were more or less the age they were when their maturation process stopped. Because of course, they're trying to live out this vow of celibacy when they enter the priesthood. Yeah, it's very complicated. But what it kind of takes me back to thinking is that the issue is really systemic. I feel that the institution itself is set up in a way that it puts children at risk. And that covering up these crimes is criminal, and that they should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. And it's sad that politics, being what they may, make it hard for this to want to happen, because what politician wants to come out and speak up against the Catholic Church? It's political suicide in a lot of cases. I mean, look at the schools in Alberta still, right, where no one is brave enough to come up and say that we need to get rid of the Catholic public school system in Alberta as a politician.
I am.
Yeah. Not enough progress. Yeah. But even in BC, I mean, the Catholic schools get public money, right? And I think it's sad that Catholics in droves still support and fund the corrupt organization. And I think they are complicit. Like, I think if you're giving your money knowingly to a criminal organization, that you're complicit. The answer, at least for me, was kind of what KASHA is about, you know, reason and science and skepticism. That's what led me out of the church. That's what will lead others out. I mean, I think the evidence of these crimes have probably dissuaded a few, but not leaving in vast numbers, sadly. Probably talked long enough, so that's most of what I got, but we can chat, I can take any questions.
Daniel, I have a question.
Yeah.
When you started leaving the church,
Yeah.
was it a problem for Patty?
Let her answer.
What do you think?
It was for a while, but I think she got over it pretty fast because, you don't think so? Because,
No, I think if we didn't have kids, I probably would have left him. But we did, we had a daughter. So I stuck it out, and I was Catholic at the time. I wasn't raised Catholic, but I was raised Christian, and I was going to be married to a Christian man, and I married a Christian man, and if my husband wasn't Christian, then I shouldn't be with him. We're unequally yoked.
her answer's better.
And so I had a Catholic friend who's actually a friend who has multiple children, trying to live that true to the Catholic teaching lifestyle. And she's like, well, you just got to pray the rosary. And I'm like, yeah, but when I joined the Catholic Church, that wasn't my thing. The priest said I didn't have to believe in Mary, I didn't have to pray the rosary, so I'm not going to, and I'm not going to start it now either. And so, yeah, I think, like I said, if we didn't have a kid together, I probably would have left him, because that wasn't the life and the person that I wanted to be with. Daniel was not the person who I thought that I should be with, but then I gave up church for Lent, and I never went back.
That's a great slogan. That should be our slogan. Want to give something up for Lent? Try church. Join KASHA. I love that. That's a whole program.
Well, what I was gonna say is, I thought because you were from a Protestant background,